Today's daf, today is Rosh Chodesh and Chanukah. Today's daf is Tzadi Ches. We'll start on Tzadi Zayin Amud Beis. We'll count down 7 lines from the top. The first word in the line is Sheba, Amai. So let's just reiterate what we know. We have cases where Kodshim were mixed up in a taroves, and they absorbed the tam of kodshim psulim. So you have kodshim ksherim, and now they absorb the flavor of kodshim psulim, and the Torah prohibits us from eating kodshim psulim. And therefore, as a result, he can't even eat the kodshim ksherim because they have a blia inside of it of kodshim psulim. In fact, the Gemara Mai, why can't he eat it? V'neisei esei v'litchei es losaseh. We have a principle called esei docha losaseh. An esei overpowers a losaseh, and in this case, we have an essay of the ochlu osam asher kupar bahem, which means that we have a mitzvah to eat a carbon that's kosher. And in this case, the essay of eating the kodshim ksherim should override the lotaseh that prohibits you from eating kodshim psulim. Now, I just want to point out that the Gemara is not asking a question about, let's say there's a mixture of nosar or something along that line, because nosar is an iser kares. And the Gemara establishes in other places in Shas that esei docha losasa only a regular classic losasa, but not a losasa sheshpo kares. But here we're talking not about eating nosar, a flavor of nosar, but rather we're talking about eating kodshim psulim, and that's only a separate lav, and therefore the Gemara thinks we should apply the principle of esei docha losas al marava ein asei doches losas of a migdash. The principle that we derive from, let's say, kelayim b'tzitzis, that esei docha losas does not apply in the Beis Hamikdash, and the Beis Hamikdash has its own standards, and therefore the essay of eating kodshim would not override the losaseh of eating kodshim psulim. Now, how does Ravin know that the principle of essay docha losaseh is suspended in the Beis Hamikdash? And this we're going to derive from Korban Pesach. Shenemar, the Torah prohibits us ve'etzem lo sishbru bo, from breaking open a bone of the lamb of the Korban Pesach. Now, in this case, we should apply the principle of esei docha losaseh. Why? Because every bone has marrow in it, and the marrow is considered basar. And the Torah commands us, with regard to the Korban Pesach, v'achlu asa basar, which means that the Torah commands us to eat the basar of Korban Pesach, including the marrow inside the bone. And yet, Rabbi Shimon ben Manasseh Omer, echad etzem sheyesh bo moach, echad etzem she'ein bo moach, when the Torah prohibits us from breaking a bone of the paschal lamb, it includes even a bone that has marrow in it. Vamai, but why would the Torah say that that's also neisei esei v'litches losaseh? Why doesn't the essay that commands us in a positive sense to eat the basar of the Korban Pesach override the prohibition of breaking the bone? Ella, but rather we have to conclude that ein esei docha losaseh b'migdash, that in the Beis Hamikdash we suspend the normal general principle of esei docha losaseh. Now, there are many questions to be asked here about why, in the formulation of Reb Shimon ben Manasseh, breaking the bone for the purpose of eating the marrow inside of it in a case of an etzem sheish bo moach. Why is that essay dochalosa? We have a requirement in essay dochalosa that it has to be be'idna, that at the moment that you violate the lav, you fulfill the essay. Now the essay is the achila. The losa says breaking the bone. So obviously, in order to get to the marrow, you have to first break the bone. But at that moment in time, you're already violating the losa. So the essays only come later when you eat the marrow that you can get out of the broken bone. But the normal mechanism of essay dochalosa, even outside the mikdash, should not apply in this case, unless we assume that the mitzvah of eating the basar incorporates any action that's necessary to arrive at that conclusion. Rav Ashi says that I can give you an alternative answer to your question why Esei Dochalosa doesn't apply over here to override the losas of eating kodshim psulim in the case where there was blia, because yikdash, the Torah uses the word yigdash, kol asher yiga bibesara yigdash. That's in Vayikra Perek Vav. And that's going to teach us that ein esei doches losas essay, meaning that the Torah has a positive command here to eat that which is kosher lachila, and implicit in the essay is the prohibition of not eating that which is pasul, which is already disqualified. So we have, in the case of eating disqualified kodshim, a double whammy. We have the essay and the losas. So we have the losas, of course, that applies to eating kodshim psulim, and now we have an essay to boot of yigdash. And therefore, when we combine the two, we have to deal with that conclusion. Okay, then. So we have two answers to the question why Esei Docha Losasa does not apply in the case of a blia of Kodshim Psulim, either because there's no such thing as Esei Docha Losasa in Beis HaMikdash as we derive from the Etzem Lo Sishbrubo, in the case of an Etzem Sheish Bo Moach, or alternatively with Rav Ashi's answer, because Ein Esei Docha Losasa v'Esei, and eating Kodshim Psulim is not only a Losasa, but it's also an essay. The Gemara asks the following question: Ashkechan chatas to miskadish bebolua. We know that if kodshim kalim absorb the taste of chatos, that's where the Torah says kol asher yiga v'bsar yigdash, and that's the halach of belia. But shar kodshim, how do we know that the same principle applies in any case of a food, even let's say chulin, that was cooked together in the same pot with kodshim, and it absorbs the taste of the kodshim, therefore it becomes also Mishmul Mishum Rabbi Eliezer. We're going to derive it from a pasuk. Now this is a very, very famous pasuk in Vayikra Zayin that teaches us that we derive many, many halachos from each one of the specific categories of kodshim, because the Torah combines them all unnecessarily, because in each case of kodshim, of these, I think it's either 6 or 7 categories of kodshim, the Torah tells you exactly what the din is. So why did the Torah have to give you this general statement of Zos HaTorah li'ola, li'mincha, l'chatos, li'oshem, li'miluim, li'zevach hashlom? I think there's 6 all told. And now the Gemara is going to embark upon a long drasha in which every one of these 6 categories is going to shed a light and teach you about all the other categories, because they were combined together in one pasuk. So we start with the first on the list, li'ola. What is the Torah telling me about ola that we can apply to all the other 5 categories? Ki ola. The halach applies to all these categories like it does to ola. What is ola? Ma ola te'una kli. And we're going to have to see what this means. The Gemara is going to go into an entire analysis of what it means that an ola needs a kli, some sort of kli shares. Afkol te'una kli, and that's going to be the paradigmic case to teach me that all karbanos require a kli. My kli, what is this kli? Ilema mizrak, if we're referring to the mizrak, which is the kli that receives the dam. I don't need Ola to teach me that, for example, in Shlomim, you need a Mizrach to be Makabal the Dam. I know it because B'Shalmi Tzibur Namik Sivbahu, Vayikach Moshe Chatzi Adam Vayosem Bagonos. This is a pasuk at the end of Parshas Mishpatim, at the time of Kabbalas HaTorah, and Moshe is commanded to receive the dam of these karbanos, including Shalmei Tzibur, because that says explicit in the pasuk Shlomim, in a mizrach, in some sort of a receptacle, which is a kli sharis. Ella, but rather, what is the Torah expecting us to derive from Olah? This sakin, that we need a knife for slaughtering. And this is coming lafuke, a sharp, just one second, some sort of stone or reed, which are not kalim. So a sakin is a keli, and that which you use for shchita, whether it be for kodshim or for that matter even for chulin, requires a kli. So the Gemara says viola gufa minolan. So you're using ola as the stepping stone to derive the requirement of a sakin. How do you know that an ola needs a sakin? And this is a fascinating limud from Yitzchak Avinu, who was going to be slaughtered as a korban ola, and we only know that Yitzchak's status was that of an ola from the fact that after the Malach says to Avram Avinu, hold off, he tells him to bring an ayil as an olah to replace Yitzchak. Obviously, Yitzchak was also an olah. The Ksiv, Vayishlach Avram es Yado v'yikach macheles, v'hasam olahi. So the macheles is the knife. So we see that Avram Avinu used a knife, or was intending to use a knife for shechting the olah. And how do we know that Yitzchak was an olah? That the ram was brought as a replacement olah for the olah of Yitzchak. Mincha. Now we go to the next thing on the list of 6 categories of karbonos mincha. Why does the Torah have to teach me mincha? What is mincha teaching me about the other 5 categories? Ma mincha eina necheles el zichrei kahuna af kol eina necheles el zichrei kahuna. So with regard to Olah, the Torah says, as we'll soon see in Bamidbar Yudches, that the korban mincha, like the korban chatos and Asha mentioned in the previous verse, is eaten, what's called the shiari mincha after the kmitza, is eaten by the kohen. So now we're going to derive that all other kodshim have to be eaten by a kohen. And it's got to be zichrei kahuna. Not the female kohanim, but the male kohen. He. I don't get it. Are you telling me something about chatas v'yosham? Chatas v'yosham behedrik sivu. The Torah in the previous pasuk before mincha in Bamidbar says explicitly kol zocher b'kohanim yochlenu. So I know from the pasuk explicitly that a chatas and an osham has to be eaten by zichrei kahuna. V'ishalmi tzibur, and perhaps you'll tell me that mincha is teaching me that even shalmi tzibur, for example, the korbanos that are brought on Chag HaShavuos, have to be eaten by zichrei kahuna. I don't need that either, because miribuya dekra asi, we have it as a derivation from a pasuk. The Torah says, "B'kodesh hakadoshim tochlenu kol zochar yochal oso." So, with regard to the shalmei, the Shalmei Tzibur, the Torah says that it has the status of Kodesh Kadoshim, and therefore it has to be eaten by the male Kohanim. Is limed al Shalmei Tzibur she'enam nechol el zichrei kahuna. So now the Gemara sort of takes a little bit of a digression. Tanoi, this is a machlokas Tanoim, which we're going to pick up on today's daf.